The room was dimly lit, a stark contrast to the bustling world outside. Inside the bar, the air was thick with tension, the scent of alcohol and machine oil mingling in the stale atmosphere. The neon lights flickered overhead, casting strange, alien-like shadows on the walls. A giant screen flickered in the corner, showing a holographic image of a distant planet, New Damascus, a world that had been ravaged by war. The projection from the screen bounced off the cold metal walls, giving the room a surreal, almost eerie feel. At the far end of the room, sitting alone at the bar, was Kira Sloan, a woman with scars that ran deeper than the visible ones. Her face was a mix of fierce determination and weary sorrow. Her short-cropped hair was streaked with silver, a reminder of the many battles she'd fought and survived. Her leather jacket, weathered and torn, bore the marks of countless skirmishes. In her hand, she clutched a glass of something dark, amber, and strong. The ice cubes inside the drink clinked as her fingers absent-mindedly swirled the contents. She wasn't just anyone. She was one of the few survivors of the human resistance, one who had witnessed Earth's darkest days. She had seen the invasion, the slaughter, and the destruction wrought by the alien species known as the Karnak. She had fought them, and she had seen humanity's most savage and violent moments unfold before her eyes. But tonight, Kira wasn't thinking about Earth, or the war, or the countless lives lost. Tonight, she was alone, nursing her drink, and trying to find peace in the wreckage of her soul. The door to the bar opened with a soft hiss, and Kira didn't look up. She had learned long ago not to trust anyone who walked into places like this, especially not in New Damascus, a world that was, to many, a ghost of its former self. Most people who came here were mercenaries, traitors, or desperate souls trying to forget their own stories. Kira was no different. But this time, something was different. The figure who entered was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a calculated precision that could only belong to someone who had been trained for battle. The figure wore a combat suit, its dark metallic plating reflecting the dim light of the room. The helmet was smooth and sleek, with no visible features, a perfect disguise for someone who wished to remain anonymous. The alien walked to the bar and sat down on the stool beside Kira, never once glancing her way. His presence was imposing, his sheer size making him stand out even more than his suit. Kira felt his eyes on her, even though his face was hidden. She could feel the weight of his attention, but she didn't react. She wasn't one to be intimidated. The alien ordered a drink in a language Kira didn't understand. When the bartender reluctantly placed a glass in front of him, the alien took it without a word, lifting it to his lips and taking a deep drink. For a moment, the two sat in silence, the quiet hum of the bar and the occasional sound of distant battles from the outside world, the only background noise. Kira's mind drifted back to the war, the long years of hardship and suffering. The resistance, though small in numbers, had fought valiantly against the Karnak invaders. But Kira knew, deep down, that they were losing the war. And now she was one of the last ones left, a survivor in a world that no longer seemed to have a place for her. She took another sip from her glass, the warmth of the alcohol spreading through her. Her eyes were trained on the reflection of the alien in the polished metal surface of the bar counter. His helmet remained impassive, unfeeling, like everything else about him. But something about him intrigued her, pulling at the edges of her consciousness. "Why are you here?" Kira finally asked, breaking the silence. The alien didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed his glass down on the counter with a deliberate slowness, as if considering his response. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep, mechanical, like a voice that had been synthesized, designed to convey authority. "I've heard the stories," he said, his voice carrying an eerie calm. "The human resistance, your strength, your survival. The war against the Karnak." Kira's eyebrows furrowed as she looked at him. She hadn't expected this. "What do you know about the resistance?" The alien turned his head slightly, as if trying to gauge her reaction, but his expression remained hidden. He didn't answer right away, instead taking another drink. The glass seemed almost too small in his massive hands. "I've fought many battles," he continued, "against species much stronger than yours, but I've never encountered anything like the humans." Kira's heart skipped a beat, her pulse quickening. She had fought countless battles against the Karnak, and many of her comrades had told her the same thing, that the Karnak had never faced anything like humanity's resilience. But to hear it from an alien warrior, one who had undoubtedly seen galaxies burn and worlds fall, made the words hit harder. "What are you really here for?" Kira asked again, her voice sharper this time. She had learned to trust her instincts, and something about this encounter felt off. She knew better than to trust any alien in a place like this. The alien shifted slightly, his eyes glimmering behind the reflective visor of his helmet. "I've come to hear your story," he said, his tone now tinged with curiosity. "I want to understand what makes you fight. What makes you, humans, so different from the others." Kira stared at him, her mind racing. She had heard stories of the Karnak warriors, of their brutal conquests, of how they had wiped out entire civilizations without a second thought. But this alien, this soldier, was different. There was no anger or arrogance in his words. Instead, there was a hint of something she hadn't expected: respect. Kira didn't speak immediately. She didn't know how to answer him. How could she explain what it meant to be human? How could she convey the fire that burned in every person she had fought alongside, every person who had sacrificed everything for Earth's survival? Instead, she leaned forward, locking eyes with the alien. "You want to know what makes us different?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "It's that we fight when there's no hope left. We fight because we don't know how to stop. You think we're weak, but that's not true. We fight because we're the last ones standing. We fight because we know the world doesn't end when it gets hard." The alien listened intently, his posture stiffening slightly as the weight of her words sank in. "I've seen your kind before," Kira continued, her gaze never wavering. "But we're not like the rest of the universe. We don't give up, no matter how much we've lost." The silence between them deepened, and for a moment, the alien said nothing. Then, without warning, he stood up from the bar and turned toward the door. "Maybe that's what scares us," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Kira. As the door slid open, and the alien stepped into the cold night, Kira's eyes followed him, a strange mix of curiosity and understanding lingering in her chest. She didn't know why he had come to her or what his true intentions were, but one thing was clear: he had seen humanity in a way few others had. And for the first time in a long while, Kira felt like she had made her mark, not just on the battlefield, but in the minds of the very creatures that sought to destroy her people. Her story had begun with resistance and sacrifice, but now it had taken a new turn. And as she sat back down, the weight of her past, her future, and her people's legacy settled on her shoulders. The fight wasn't over yet. But now, someone from the stars had seen humanity's fire firsthand. And they wouldn't forget it. The alien sat across from Kira Sloan, his helmeted face inscrutable as the dim light of the bar flickered around them. They were surrounded by the hum of low conversations and clinking glasses, the air thick with the scent of burnt metal and spilled liquor. New Damascus, a world once teeming with life, was now little more than a battleground, the remnants of a lost civilization clinging to its last breaths. Yet, in this desolate place, Kira was about to tell her story. Kira had seen things no one should ever see. She had been through the darkest moments of human history, each memory etched into her mind like a scar. It was a history she didn't want to relive, yet the alien before her had asked for it, his voice cold and unfeeling. "Tell me the story," the alien had said, his voice a mechanical hum. "What made humanity fight? What made you survive?" She had hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to revisit the horrors of the past. But there was something in his tone, something that indicated this alien, unlike the others she had encountered, was genuinely curious. Perhaps he was different from the invaders she had fought against for so long. Kira leaned back in her chair, taking a long drink from her glass. She could feel the weight of her past pressing on her shoulders, but it was time to speak. The alien needed to hear it. Humanity needed to hear it, too. The beginning. The war had begun many years ago, before Earth was ravaged by alien invaders. It had started as a small conflict, a series of skirmishes between two factions on a distant continent. But the world had been too fragile, too divided to avoid the flames of war. It spread quickly, consuming cities, burning fields, and turning oceans into blood-stained battlegrounds. The world's leaders had tried to prevent it, but they were too slow, too naive. The first few years of the war had been brutal. Humanity had seen things that had shattered its belief in itself. The planet's population had been decimated, not just by bombs and guns, but by a loss of hope. People who had once lived in peace were now forced into a fight for their very survival. Families were torn apart, cities reduced to rubble, and the Earth itself seemed to be dying under the weight of mankind's violence. In those early years, Kira was just a child, watching from the safety of her home as the world outside descended into chaos. She remembered her father, a soldier, leaving to fight in the war. He had kissed her forehead, promising he would return. But he never did. He was one of the first to fall in battle. And with his death, Kira's innocence was lost forever. She remembered the day her city was destroyed. The night sky was filled with the blinding light of explosions, the ground shaking beneath her feet as the enemy forces advanced. Kira's mother had grabbed her and her younger brother, pulling them into the basement, hiding them from the violence above. But even in the dark, they could hear the sounds of war. Guns, screams, the crash of buildings falling. Her mother had tried to shield them, trying to make sense of the senseless destruction. But Kira had already known what was happening. She could see the fear in her mother's eyes, and that fear became Kira's own. The turning point. Years passed, and the war raged on. Humanity, battered and broken, was losing hope. The invaders, powerful and relentless, showed no mercy. It seemed as though the human race was destined for extinction. But in the darkest moments, something unexpected happened. Humanity's spirit, which had been nearly destroyed by war, began to rise again. Small groups of survivors, soldiers, scientists, civilians, formed a resistance. They fought not just to survive, but to reclaim what they had lost. Kira, now an adult, had joined the resistance, driven by the desire for revenge and justice. The human fighters were scrappy, using every resource at their disposal to strike back at the invaders. Their weapons were old, their technology inferior, but they were driven by an indomitable will. They refused to accept defeat. Kira was assigned to a special team, a group of elite soldiers tasked with a mission that would change the course of the war. The team was small, but it was made up of the fiercest fighters humanity had left. They were led by Captain Tarek, a seasoned veteran who had seen the worst of the war and had never once wavered in his resolve. The mission was simple: infiltrate the enemy's command center and plant an EMP device that would disable their technology. It was a dangerous task, one that had never been attempted before. If they succeeded, they would cripple the enemy's forces and buy humanity a chance at survival. But the risks were enormous. If they failed, the war would be over. Kira's team moved under the cover of darkness, sneaking through the enemy's defenses and into the heart of their stronghold. Every step they took was fraught with danger. The Xarnok were everywhere, watching, waiting. Kira's heart raced in her chest as she moved with the others, knowing that each moment could be their last. But they made it. They reached the heart of the command center and planted the EMP device. As Kira set the timer, she could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. If they didn't make it out in time, the explosion would destroy everything. But they didn't have much choice. It was their only shot. As the countdown began, Kira and her team made their way back through the corridors, avoiding detection as best they could. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every step felt like it could be their last. When the timer hit 0, there was a moment of silence, followed by the deafening roar of the explosion. The lights flickered, and the building shook as the EMP device detonated. The alien technology, once invincible, faltered. The Xarnox ships went dark, their weapons powerless. For the first time in the war, humanity had an advantage. The final stand. But victory came at a cost. Kira's team had made it out of the command center, but not all of them made it back alive. Captain Tarek had fallen in the explosion, his body torn apart by the shockwave. The loss of their leader was a blow, but it also sparked something inside the remaining soldiers, a fire that would carry them through to the end. In the months that followed, the tide of the war began to shift. The Xarnox, once unchallenged, found themselves struggling against a humanity that refused to die. Every battle, every skirmish, pushed the invaders further back. Humanity's resistance was small, but it was growing stronger with each victory. Kira fought on, her grief over the loss of her comrades fueling her determination. With every battle, she grew more ruthless, more determined. She had seen what humanity was capable of, and she knew that as long as they refused to give up, they could win. And they did. The final battle was fought on the ruined streets of New Damascus, a city that had once been a symbol of humanity's greatness. The Xarnox launched their last assault, determined to crush what remained of the resistance. But they underestimated the humans they had so long dismissed. With the EMP device's success and the renewed strength of the resistance, humanity's forces launched a full counterattack. It was a brutal, desperate battle. But humanity's will was unbreakable. They pushed the Xarnox back, forcing them to retreat. For the first time in years, the invaders were on the run. The final revelation. After the dust settled, Kira stood among the wreckage, looking out at the city that was now in ruins. Her heart was heavy with the weight of the sacrifices made, but there was a sense of relief in knowing that the war was finally over. Humanity had won. The alien, the one who had asked her for the story, now stood beside her. He had listened to every word, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and disbelief. He had seen the truth, the strength of humanity, the power of its spirit. "You were right," the alien said, his voice filled with reverence. "I've fought against countless species, but none of them have fought like you. You humans. There's something in you that makes you unstoppable." Kira turned to him, her expression unreadable. "We're not unstoppable. We've lost so much, but we don't give up. That's what makes us different." The alien nodded slowly, a hint of respect in his gaze. No species will forget the moment humanity's patience broke. And with that, the war was over. But the story of humanity's survival would live on, echoing across the galaxy for generations to come. The alien's realization. The darkened room was silent except for the faint hum of the ship's engines. The alien warrior, Xoreth, stood motionless, gazing out of the viewport at the planet below. Earth, a world that had once seemed insignificant, was now the center of his thoughts. He had been sent to this planet by his superiors, tasked with monitoring and gathering intelligence on the human species. It was meant to be just another routine mission, a simple observation of a primitive species, easily controlled by the more advanced forces of the universe. But something had happened during his stay, something that was unsettling. The stories he had heard from the soldiers on the front lines, the reports from his commanders, all described humans as weak, fragile creatures. Their technologies were outdated, their societies fractured, and their history was nothing more than a long tale of violence and war. Xoreth had believed every word of it. It had seemed simple enough. Another species to conquer, another planet to bring under control. But what he had witnessed since arriving on Earth had shaken him. Humans, despite their apparent weaknesses, had a tenacity, a fire within them that no other species seemed to possess. Xoreth had seen it in the way they fought, fiercely, without hesitation. He had seen it in the survivors who, after their cities were burned to the ground, rose again to fight. He had seen it in the faces of those who had lost everything, but still refused to give up. For the first time, Soreth began to question his mission. He had watched humans, seen their strengths, and most disturbingly, he had come to respect them. That thought terrified him. The moment of realization. Soreth's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden buzz of his communicator. The face of Commander Zarkan appeared on the screen, his expression cold and calculating. "Soreth, report. How goes the observation?" Zarkan's voice was steady, but there was an underlying tone of impatience. Soreth straightened, forcing his mind back to his duty. "The humans are proving more difficult to control than expected," he said, his voice low. "They have fought back against every advance we've made, and they seem to adapt quickly to our tactics." Zarkan's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting we delay the invasion? You know the orders." Soreth hesitated. The invasion was inevitable, he knew. But there was something in his voice, something that made him question the decision. He had witnessed too much. "No," Soreth said after a moment. "But I believe there is more to this planet than we have realized. These humans, they are not as weak as we thought." Zarkan's expression flickered with surprise. "What do you mean? Have you gone soft?" "Soreth." "No," Soreth responded sharply. "I am not soft. But I have observed their spirit, their determination, their ability to survive against impossible odds. I am beginning to think that this species might pose more of a challenge than we anticipated." Zarkan's face darkened. "That's irrelevant. They are a primitive species. The invasion will proceed as planned. We have superior strength, and we will break them." "Understood." Soreth's jaw tightened. "Understood, Commander." As the transmission ended, Soreth sat back in his chair, staring out at the Earth once more. There was something deeply troubling about his newfound respect for humanity. He had been taught that his people were the apex of existence, superior to all others. But humans, despite their limited resources, had shown a resilience that he could not ignore. It was both fascinating and terrifying. He had witnessed human soldiers, not unlike the ones he had encountered in countless battles across the galaxy, fight for their lives. They did not retreat. They did not show fear. They fought, and they died, but they always returned, always ready to face another battle. And even when the odds were stacked against them, they found a way to fight back. A glimpse of humanity's soul. A few days later, Soreth found himself in the middle of a human settlement, surrounded by ruins. The city had been decimated by the Xarnuk's latest attack, and the survivors, though few in number, had managed to escape into the remaining ruins. He had been sent to observe, to gather intelligence, but what he saw before him stopped him in his tracks. Humanity's will to survive was evident in the makeshift shelters and the weapons they had crafted from the remnants of their destroyed homes. But it was something else that caught his attention. A group of human children, no older than 7 or 8, huddled together in the ruins, helping each other collect supplies. They were scared, yes, but they did not run. They worked together, supporting one another with a maturity far beyond their years. Soreth approached cautiously, his heart heavy with a strange sense of awe. He had witnessed species across the galaxy, each with their own unique traits and strengths. But none had displayed this level of unity, this level of selflessness. He saw the children, so young, so fragile, and yet their determination was as strong as any soldier's. One of the children, a girl with brown eyes and dark hair, noticed him standing there. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Instead, she stood tall and stared back at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked in a quiet but steady voice. "Why are you here?" Soreth was taken aback. Most creatures would have cowered at his presence, but this child stood tall, as though she had nothing to fear. In that moment, he felt a strange stirring within himself, a sense of respect, of admiration, that he had never felt for a species before. "I am an observer," Soreth said, his voice faltering. "I have come to watch." The girl nodded slowly. "You've seen what we've been through. You've seen the battles. But we don't give up. We won't." Soreth stared at her, his thoughts racing. What kind of species could produce such courage, such conviction, in the face of overwhelming destruction? What made them so different from the countless civilizations he had destroyed in his conquests? For the first time in his life, Soreth began to feel doubt. That Karnak had conquered entire worlds, enslaving species without a second thought. They had always been the stronger race, the one that dictated the fate of others. But humanity was something else. They fought not because they had to, but because they believed they could survive. Soreth turned away from the girl and walked back to his ship, his mind a storm of confusion. The mission he had been assigned was clear. He was supposed to observe, gather intelligence, and report back. But now, something had changed. He was no longer certain that the Karnak had the right to conquer Earth. He wasn't sure if they had the right to destroy a species that could show this kind of strength. The dilemma. Back in the quiet of his ship, Soreth sat in front of the control panel, staring at the vast expanse of space before him. His mission still lay before him, but he no longer felt the same certainty about it. The more he thought about the humans he had observed, the children, the soldiers, the survivors, the more he realized that their strength lay not in their technology or their weapons, but in something deeper. It was their spirit. It was their refusal to break, to give in, no matter how dire the circumstances. They fought not just for survival, but for the future. They fought to preserve what little humanity they had left, and in doing so, they proved to him that their place in the galaxy was earned, not by their physical strength, but by their unyielding will to survive. Soreth's mind drifted back to his earlier conversation with his commander. He had been ready to go through with the invasion, to carry out his orders. But now he wasn't so sure. As the silence of space surrounded him, Soreth made a decision. He would not destroy humanity. He could not. He would fight alongside them. The final reflection and impact. The battle had raged for days, and now, as the dust settled and the echoes of conflict faded into the eerie quiet of the aftermath, Kira Sloan found herself standing on the broken streets of New Damascus, staring out at the horizon. The once thriving city was now little more than a crumbled ruin, a shadow of what it had been. The skyline, once filled with towering glass and steel, had been reduced to jagged skeletons of buildings, their glass windows shattered by the alien bombardments. But it wasn't just the physical destruction that weighed heavily on Kira. It was the faces of the fallen. The soldiers, the civilians, the friends who had fought beside her, all gone. Humanity had sacrificed everything to repel the Karnak, the alien invaders who had sought to strip Earth of its freedom. And now, with the war over, Kira was left to wrestle with the reality of what that victory had cost. As she stood there, the wind rustling through the rubble, Kira's mind drifted back to the beginning of the war. She had been so young then, full of hope and idealism. But the years of conflict had stripped that away, replacing it with a hard, unrelenting resolve to survive. She had seen too much death, too much pain, and too much sacrifice. But even as the pain of loss gnawed at her, there was something else. Something deeper, something she had only begun to understand in the final days of the war. There had been a moment, a turning point, when humanity's spirit had broken through. It was that moment that had turned the tide in their favor and led them to victory. And now, standing amidst the ruin, Kira realized that this moment, the final reflection, was not just about survival, but about something more profound. It was about the impact humanity had made on the galaxy and the legacy they would leave. The beginning of the end. The war had begun with an unexpected, overwhelming force. The Karnak had arrived without warning, their massive ships blocking out the sun as they descended upon Earth. Their technology was far superior to anything humanity had ever seen, and for a time, it seemed like there was no hope. The human forces were overwhelmed, cities fell, and entire nations were brought to their knees. Kira had fought in the early battles, unsure of what she was even fighting for. The resistance had been small, disorganized, and ill-prepared, but there was something within the human spirit that refused to be extinguished. They had been battered, broken, but never defeated. And it was in those darkest hours that the true strength of humanity began to shine. The resistance grew, not through force of arms, but through the unity of people from all walks of life. Scientists, teachers, farmers, soldiers, they all banded together in the fight for survival. They knew they could not defeat the Xarnok with superior technology, but they had something the Xarnok could never understand: resilience. And it was that resilience, that refusal to surrender, that had changed the course of the war. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't a missile or a fighter jet. It was the will to fight, to endure, and to never give up. As the resistance grew stronger, the humans developed new strategies, using guerrilla tactics and their knowledge of the terrain to strike at the Xarnok's weak points. They adapted quickly, and with each victory, they gained confidence. The Xarnok, once so sure of their conquest, began to realize that they were not dealing with a weak, primitive species. They were facing something much stronger than they had anticipated. But it wasn't until the final decisive battle that Kira truly understood what had made humanity so formidable. The moment of revelation. It had been a brutal, exhausting fight. The Xarnok had concentrated their forces on the last human stronghold, New Damascus, intending to crush the resistance once and for all. The humans had fought tooth and nail, with every soldier giving everything they had. Kira had led one of the final assault teams, charging into the heart of the Xarnok's command center. But it wasn't the weapons or the tactics that had won them the battle. It was the sheer determination of the human spirit. They fought not for glory, not for riches, but for their homes, for their families, for their very way of life. And in that moment, when the EMP pulse had been activated, disabling the Xarnok's fleet and their weaponry, Kira had realized that it was humanity's refusal to accept defeat that had made all the difference. The Xarnok, for all their strength, had underestimated the one thing that humans had in abundance: heart. They had come to Earth thinking that they would simply crush the inhabitants and move on to the next world. But they hadn't counted on the humans' ability to adapt, to fight for what was theirs, and to unite in the face of destruction. As the Xarnok forces retreated into space, their technology useless and their morale shattered, Kira had felt a strange sense of relief and pride. The battle was over. Earth had won. But as the dust settled and the survivors began to rebuild, she couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper had changed, something that would impact not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. The legacy of humanity. In the days that followed, as the world began the long process of recovery, Kira's thoughts returned to the alien presence that had once seemed so distant and indifferent. The Xarnok had been just one of many species that had looked down on humanity, dismissing them as weak, primitive creatures. But Earth had shown them something that no other species had ever shown before: the ability to endure, to fight back against impossible odds, and to rebuild from the ashes. Humanity's legacy, Kira realized, wasn't in the technology they had developed or the battles they had won. It was in their capacity for hope, for unity, and for survival. No matter how many times they were knocked down, they would always rise again. And now, standing amidst the ruins of New Damascus, Kira understood that the story of humanity had not just been one of survival. It was a story of transformation. Earth had gone from a small, isolated planet in the corner of the galaxy to one that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the greatest civilizations in the universe. The Xarnok, once so certain of their superiority, had been humbled. And the galaxy would never forget the day that humanity's patience broke, and they fought back. As Kira looked out over the city, now being rebuilt by the survivors, she saw not just the remnants of destruction, but the seeds of a new beginning. The war had left scars, but it had also given birth to a new era, a new humanity that had learned to stand tall, no longer afraid of the forces that had once sought to crush them. The universe, once indifferent to Earth, would now look at humanity with respect. Kira knew that their story would be remembered, not just as a tale of war, but as a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The future. The rebuilding was slow, but it was steady. Humanity's greatest asset, their unity, had carried them through the darkest times. As new leaders emerge, people worked together to restore what had been lost and build a world that would never again be caught unprepared. But Kira knew that this was just the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and the Xarnok were not the only threat lurking in the darkness. There would be other battles, other challenges, but humanity was no longer the weak species it had once been. They had learned, adapted, and proved that they could face anything the universe threw at them. As she stood by the ruins of New Damascus, watching the first rays of sunlight break through the clouds, Kira felt a sense of peace. The war had been won, but the real victory was something greater. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. And from this moment on, no species would ever forget the day that humanity's patience finally snapped, and no one would ever underestimate them again.